waho ia tama o kotahi, I te putanga tama I te rangi tā more more nui, I te putanga tama I te rangi tūhaha, heke e hui a rangi nui e tūnei. Whiti whiti nuku, whiti whiti rangi, whiti whiti papa, whiti whiti tau, tū mau mai te rā e tūnei, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first online hui of the Aotearoa New Zealand Sustainable Development Goals Summit Series 2020-2021. Ko kōpana te aika tōku ingoa, no ngā Pākihi whakateka teka o Waitaha, o tira ko Ngāi Tahu huriri te hapu, ko ia nei hoki te reo rāhiri e rere kaua tūnei ki au koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. My name's Kōpana Te Aika, and I'm your MC for tonight's hui. And this is a virtual event which is jam-packed with speakers, music, local champions, and 2 practical workshop streams. This is all aiming to inspire and help us all understand how to take the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, to a whole new level. Before we get into things tonight, though, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules in this post-COVID zooey climate that we live in. And so I want all of us to participate fully in tonight's session. Stay engaged, and I would recommend that you turn your phone to silent, if not to the please do not disturb mode. It's easy to get distracted by things around your physical space, other devices and tabs and children, pots and kettles going off left, right and centre. So we want everybody's attention focused in on tonight's discussion. Another key thing, please stay muted unless asked to be unmuted. This helps lower any disruptions during the session. And if possible, please keep your video on. We'll take a few screen grabs throughout the night as we go. And if you don't want to be captured, simply disable your video. Another key thing is your friend. If you have any comments, questions, observations, reflections, use the chat function at the bottom of your main Zoom screen. And you also have the beautiful tool, which is interactions. So there's a bit of a thumbs up that you can use if there's something that you really like. Use the emojis, or even just your body language to indicate that you are participating or reacting to a particular comment. We'll start the session in the Zoom link together. We've got a bit of a panel discussion where we've got 4 key speakers. There'll be a bit of a Q&A opportunity after that. And then we're going to split out into 2 workshop streams. The first one is the power of visual storytelling, which will happen in this Zoom link. For the other workshop, you'll need to jump off this link and join another Zoom link for the SDG 101 session. We will come back to this Zoom link before we end the session tonight. And there's some details in the program document that you received prior to the session, which has the details in there as well. And as we get closer to the moment where we're splitting off later in the evening, I'll also go over the Zoom details for the SDG 101 session. Don't worry, we'll guide you through it when we get closer to that particular part of tonight's session. We'll be using the breakout room function for small group discussions as well, and so a pop-up window will appear in front of you asking you to join that particular session. Please make sure you click on the invitation, have safe and brave, courageous conversations tonight, and most of all, again, in a digital forum, have patience. Flow may be disrupted, you might get a little bit of feedback or drop off at some point. It's all okay. And so we're going to get into a little bit of a history 101 on the SDGs. I'm just going to share my screen. And so hopefully that's popped up there. And so these here are the 17 SDGs that we're focused on tonight. And so the decade of action is upon us. The United Nations Decade of Action is based around these 17 sustainable development goals designed to create a more sustainable and more equitable present and future. Guide to how we can enable a more sustainable present and future. Aotearoa New Zealand has signed up to these goals and is working towards their achievement before they mature in 2030. They call for urgent transformation in how we do things. But how do we do that? How do we work across sectors effectively to achieve the needed change? Answering these questions started with SDG summits in Wellington and in Auckland in 2018 and 2019. This challenge is now being picked up by a Christchurch-based team with the upcoming Aotearoa New Zealand Sustainable Development Goals Summit Series 2020-2021. This series brings together people from across the country, across different sectors and walks of life, in order to discuss how we can achieve these goals, to look at how New Zealanders are tracking in relation to these goals, and what we can learn from the successes which have already been achieved. Under the key theme of Pathways to Urgent Action, the 2020-2021 series is made up of 3 online hui and 1 in-person hui. Each hui will feature a keynote speaker, local champions, activations, and practical planning sessions. The hui will build upon one another, taking participants on a journey from individual to collective action hui, entitled See the Change. The second online hui isn't until next year, but don't worry, put it in your calendars now, 25th of March 2021. And the title for that session is Be the Change. The third online hui takes place on the 24th of June 2021. The focus of that particular hui is looking at how we can work together to initiate this change. And the culmination of the series ends in a face-to-face event here on UC, at the UC campus, entitled Collaboration for Systematic Change. And the dates for that are the 2nd to the 3rd of September 2021. The 2020-2021 Summit Series is co-hosted by the University of Canterbury, Te Whare Wānanga o Waitaha, Te Whare Wānaka o Aoraki, Lincoln University, with support from Ara Institute of Canterbury and Christchurch City Council. Sorry, I think I skipped ahead a little bit of my slides there. See, issues? It's okay. Carry on. This would not have happened without our partners as well. So we've got Tourism New Zealand, Christchurch New Zealand, New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, Universities of New Zealand, and Humanetics. And so now we're going to get straight into our panelists' lightning talks. And so we've got 4 speakers lined up tonight, and each of them have 5 minutes to share their thoughts in relation to the SDGs and other kaupapa that our speakers are passionate about. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very first speaker, one of my whanaunga from Ngāti Huikoi, over in Kokorarata, just over the peninsula here. His name's Tāmati Cunningham, and this year he's the head student at Cashmere High School. He's passionate about normalising te ao Māori and Māori language and empowering rangatahi Māori voice. You may have seen him before at TEDx, and he's freed himself up to share with us some whakaaro around his connection back to our taiao, our environment. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Tāmati if he can unmute himself, and I'll hand the reins over to Tāmati. Kei a koe hoa.
Ko taupō nui, ko taupō roa, ko taupō piako, ko te haro nui a taupō, te hei Māori ora. Ko mā te pani, ko mā te kaura, ko tāni rea, ko mārama huikea. Hui kina mai te tātou ke te whare o marikore. Ko tahuma tā, ko kauma te roa, ko hini te raraku, ko hoikai, ko te roa. Ko tū te huare e tuaki nei, pami e huige tā ki e. Ko wai au, ko te haupāta ki te mauka, ko kaurata te awa, ko maka whiu te waka, ko tū te huare me te whare tipuna, ko kai tau te iwi, ko kāti hui kai te hapu. Ko Cunningham tōku ingoa whānau, ko Tāmati Cunningham tōku ingoa. Kia ora. I know today's topic is about see the change, but I believe that there is a big difference between seeing the change and recognising the change. Seeing the change is just acknowledging that something has differed from what it was before, whereas recognising the change is about understanding what has changed and how it can affect its respective environments. Many, if not all of us, are here today because we have recognised the change globally. But first and foremost, we need to look more locally. Together, we need to focus on the small things before we can impact the big things. Mā pango mā whiro ka ote ai te mahi. With black and red, the work will get done. This whakatauki speaks about how with persistence and with cooperation, things will get done. It is the people we surround ourselves with, that share our values with, that create the ideas and how we interact with our environment. In the TEDx speech I did last year, I briefly talked about my awa, the Kokorarata awa. My whānau recognised the environmental change and understood how our awa interacts with the land around it, from its at the time eroding banks to the ocean. My whānau knew that this wasn't good enough, and so we had to make a change for the better. Over the time of my life, I've seen my awa come back to life, and the river flow you can see just physically breathing. No weeds to suffocate it, just birds, trees, and fish to let it thrive. The river was just one aspect of the environment. It had a domino effect as we explored and enjoyed providing the land with kaitiakitanga. It also allowed us to embrace whakapanaungatanga and pass down the knowledge from one generation to the next, as we nurtured the whenua and nurtured us. It is our role to influence others to join us in working together in a common goal, so things can get better. So for those of us coming after us can learn and continue the work that we will no doubt only do. It is a lot to grasp and understand in such a short time. So take the time you need to recognise in yourself what part you can play. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe Tāmati, o tira tēnei rā te mihi atu ki a koe, mo e whakawātia nei a koe tēnei o ngā pō. We've got a bit of a rangatahi theme going on here tonight. We've had Tāmati, and now we're moving on to Lucy Gray. And if you are involved in anything around climate change and the climate movement, you're probably familiar with Lucy Gray. Not too bad for a rangatahi, a taiohi, still at high school, who is the chairperson of the School Strike for Climate Change and a member of the Christchurch School Strike for Climate movement. And so you may be familiar with, I think there were 3 in total last year, 3 walks for climate change that took place, 3 marches rather, throughout the year last year, which I think is a very brave thing for somebody of Lucy's age to be championing. And so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Lucy. Tēnā koe, Lucy.
Kia ora. Tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te ngākau o ngā tangata. Ko te mea nui, ko te aroha, te hei mauri ora. Ngā mihi nui ki a rangi nui, ki te whaia a papatuanaku. E takoto mai rā ki waho tēnā kōrua. E whari e tū nei, e whakamaru ana i a tātou tēnā koe. E ngā reo, e ngā iwi, e ngā hau e whā, ngā mihi ki a koutou tēnā koutou katoa. Ko aio, ko ngā kāhatu whakarekare kā o tamatea pōkai whenua te maunga, ko moana nuia kiwa te moana, ko opa waho te awa, ko ruahine te waka, ko Sutherland te iwi, ko Gray te hapu, ko te iringa o Kakura te marae, no Ototahi aho, ko Anne toko whaia, ko Stuart toko matua, ko Hannah toko tuakana, ko Lucy toko ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. When I was 10 years old, I woke up. I learned about climate change and was stunned. How was it that for over 50 years, people had known that climate breakdown poses a threat to everything on Earth and had done so little? How was it that the climate crisis was not front page news and informing every choice and decision we make every day? When I was confronted by the urgency and scale of the crisis, I did the obvious thing to me. I took action. This started with me making day-to-day changes in my life, changes that as an individual I had the power to make. However, I soon realized that this issue was far too big for us to be facing alone. So I started having conversations with others, talking with friends and family and peers, grew into connecting with schools and community groups. These connections grew into starting School Strike for Climate in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, and standing alongside millions of people across the world in the 2019 climate strikes. This was all about young people standing up across the globe, rising up and saying enough is enough. In Aotearoa, our voices have made a difference. Around the country, city councils have declared climate emergencies. We have a Zero Carbon Act, a climate commission, banks and businesses are moving towards zero carbon, and climate change is being taught in schools. We are moving forward. However, the work has only just begun and time is not on our side. As you probably already know, our futures are hanging in the balance. Climate change is affecting us with higher temperatures, sea level rise, ocean acidification, melting glaciers, and the extinction of plants and animals. But these facts don't really paint the social toll. Climate refugees as close as our Pacific neighbours are losing their homes. The widening gap between those with enough and those without. The threat of conflict over resource scarcity, and growing anxiety and mental health statistics, just to name a few. As temperatures rise, no one will be left unaffected and no one should be left behind. So we can't have a conversation about climate change without talking about climate justice and recognising that those who are least responsible will suffer the most. This means it's crucial to work together and use this crisis as a vehicle for positive change to create a more just world. The UN Sustainability Goals are a pathway for change. These goals, which focus on poverty, gender inequality, education, sustainable economic growth, and environmental protection, provide us with the blueprint for adaptation and mitigation of climate change. But as we all know, it isn't going to be easy. Talk of positive, progressive social change can generate fear, resistance, and conflict, as we have seen all across the globe. We have seen an unfair burden of change placed on the individuals, where governments, leaders, and businesses have shirked their responsibilities, often placing profit and popularity over the well-being of people and planet. While the climate crisis is an environmental disaster, at its heart, it is a social and economic crisis, born out of unsustainable growth, consumerism, and the exploitation of our planet constantly. For my generation to have a future, we need radical change. The kind of radical change that means all life is valued and protected. So how do we come together with shared goals and find our way through this? We need to come at issues with an open mind and share our thoughts respectfully. If we do not have a world where people, no matter the colour of their skin, their religion, their sexuality, their age, their status or ideology, can feel listened to and safe, we need to change. If we do not have a society where people feel included, no matter who or what they identify as, we need to change. If the spaces for people to be who they are exactly as themselves do not exist, then we need to create them. We need to listen to the concerns of the young, learn from the wisdom of the old, and uphold the rangatiratanga of Indigenous peoples. When we prioritise the needs of the most vulnerable and affected in our communities, then we will be on the right path. It is only with making spaces for everybody's voices we can move forwards justly. I've always been passionate about justice. It doesn't make sense to me why you wouldn't want justice. Why wouldn't you be willing to invest in renewable and sustainable energy? Why wouldn't you want a healthy future for everyone? Why wouldn't you want to put an end to injustice? We need to speak out when we see injustice, keep asking the obvious questions, and listen to each other. So if you are listening to this, feeling overwhelmed by climate change, I urge you to reach out, find your voice, start a conversation. In doing so, you're taking action. These conversations can grow into a sense of belonging that can sustain and support you. If you are passionate about becoming part of the solution, you can make climate justice inform everyday choices, like what you choose to eat, how you travel, what you buy, what groups you support, who you follow on social media, who you invest with, and who you vote for. Through my journey, I've learned that you don't need to wait for someone else to act. You don't need to wait until you're older to make a difference, and you definitely don't need to be experienced to take a lead. All of our voices count, all of our voices are needed, and it will be in coming together that we will be our strongest. He waka e ke noa, kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koe, Lucy, o tira tēnei rā te mihi kia koe. That idea of finding your voice and that being a vehicle to enable action, I think is it's just fantastic and very powerful and moving for somebody of your age. I think it shows everybody the power of the future generations in terms of, you know, these are our up and coming leaders. Koine ngā rangatira mō a popo. Nō reira tēnei te mihi kia koe, Lucy. Our next speaker is Dr. Pedram, who is the Special Advisor for the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable is actually quite the tongue-twisting word I've picked up in preparation for tonight. But again, he's the Special Advisor for the Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations Association of New Zealand. He's an advisor, Hapai Hapori, to the Government of New Zealand, particularly based in the Department of Internal Affairs. And although I haven't had a lot to do with Dr. Pedram, I believe he is also the instigator of the Summit Series. So, tēnei te mihi kia koe te rangatira, kei a koe te wā. I'll hand it over to you. And you're muted. Sorry, Pedram.
Kia ora, Colin. Thank you. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No Mount Alborz ahau ko Pirnia te whanua, ko Pedram ahau, kānui, te mihi, kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to start by Peter Drucker and his famous quote, "What gets measured gets managed." In the past 20 years, there is this shift and this desire to move from GDP and economic measurements of success towards a well-being discourse. And SDGs to a great extent focus on that. We are very lucky to live in a country where we had in 2019 a well-being budget that is unique in its kind. So how can we actually measure the SDGs, and what are some of the challenges? I have 3 bullet points really that I like to raise to your attention, 3 concerns. So we have two tools, 2 frameworks really that we measure the SDGs with. These 2 tools have been put together by the Treasury, the Living Framework Standard, LFS, and then we have Stats New Zealand 2019 in framework, which is called Indicators Aotearoa New Zealand. So these 2 instruments, particularly the IANS, or the Indicators Aotearoa New Zealand, that was put together last year, which has 100 indicators, were formed really, this tool was formed with regards to the SDGs. With SDGs, as you know, we have 169 indicators, and these were translated into New Zealand context, and 100 indicators were adopted. So 3 challenges with this framework, with these indicators. Number 1 is the question of language. There are a range of terms and concepts within this framework and in general in development speak that actually are fuzzy. Concepts like accountability. What does it mean really in reality? Who are we accountable? As we can see, it tends to be normally upwards towards the funders without taking into consideration downward accountability to the people, to the community, and I speak in terms of civil society organizations. And then sideway accountability to partners on the ground. So buzzwords that actually, you know, within the framework context, such as ownership, partnership, they need to be clearly defined if we are to measure them and how they develop. This will, of course, actually help us to achieve them better. The next issue is the data question. Data is scattered. It's you know, and out of for example, the striking information that came my way was how out of the 100 indicators that Stats New Zealand currently has, we have no data for 48 of these indicators. So there's this information gap, and there's then the question of conflicting information. There's data available, but it's collected inconsistently. And then there is proxy information gap. There's some data available, but it does not provide enough information. So then there's the question of timely information gap and capacity and so on, which I will not go further with. So these are issues that I ask you kindly to really reflect on as we advance further. The final point that I want to make, and I think it's the most important one, is that surprisingly, both Treasury and LSF have not included the Te Ao Māori perspective and well-being defined from a Māori worldview. As it stands, we are not measuring what Te Ao and Māori worldview of well-being means. So the indicators that we have are faulty. Both Treasury and Stats New Zealand have admitted, and they are to this challenge that we have, and they are actually working on this. But this is the first priority if we are to achieve the SDGs. So thank you for this opportunity. He waka eke noa. We are all in this together.
Tēnā koe, Pedram, o tira e mihi kaua tēnei ki a koe. Little bit disturbing, I think, to think that we don't have data or in relation to, I think it was 42 indicators in terms of
48. I'm just going to grab my charger. I'm running out of battery. Sorry.
Go for it. But yeah, to think that we don't have data around indicating our progress in relation to some of these issues is just shocking, really concerning for me. And in particular, that idea of the Māori worldview. I mean, hey, we're in a bicultural nation, multicultural society, got a treaty. Where's the treaty in this? Anywho, that's another topic that we might be able to delve into a little bit further on in tonight's proceedings. Now going to hand over to Raewyn Jones, who is the Chief Executive of Well Energy Trust and the co-chair of the Waikato Wellbeing Project. And I'm sure she's going to share with us a little bit around what the Waikato Wellbeing Project is. And she's also on the National Advisory Board for Impact Investment. So again, without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Raewyn. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora everybody. Thank you for having me today. What wonderful speakers. Tāmati reminded us that with the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to look locally, and it's going to take persistence and cooperation to get anywhere. And with Lucy, your powerful call for change, and Pedram, you're quite right. What gets measured gets done and managed. And that point about Ao Māori and the work to Ao Māori worldview in achieving our goals is just missing. And so what I'd like to share with you today is a very practical journey to see the change. How did the Waikato Wellbeing Project come into being? Why did we see that change needed to happen, and how are we using the Sustainable Development Goals to achieve that change? So I'm just, if it's all right, I'd like to share my screen with you. Okay. Right. Are we all seeing the Waikato Wellbeing Project first screen there? Wonderful. So the Waikato Wellbeing Project was born about 2 years ago. From a desire to take the Sustainable Development Goals, which I've been working with for some time in my role as a community funder, as Chief Executive Waikato, the Well Energy Trust, and to say, what do they mean for us? They can be seen as a little bit high level, sometimes even a bit third worldy, and how do you apply them? How do you make them meaningful for yourself as an individual, for your organization, for your community, and for your nation? So that was some thoughts that were going through my mind when I was working in my role as a funder. And I had the opportunity to learn about impact investment and the way that capital can be used to actually achieve these goals. So I realized that there's never going to be enough tax dollars to achieve our vision of a better future. There's never going to be enough rates dollars, and there will never be enough funding dollars unless every decision we make as a consumer, as an individual, as a citizen, as a corporation, as a local government and a central government, unless we're working together across sectors using all of our resources, we're going to have trouble achieving the goals that we're hoping to achieve. So those are some of the things that were behind the development of the Waikato Wellbeing Project. Essentially, the Waikato Wellbeing Project, oops, gone too far. Go back one. Is a regional initiative, so it's locally based, it's a place-based initiative for a more environmentally sustainable, prosperous and inclusive Waikato by 2030. So very simple, sounds easy. We hope to work together across sectors to achieve, and this is where Pedram's view about what gets measured gets managed, SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely goals, which we can apply for our region and achieve together. We see the Waikato Wellbeing Project is offering a tool. It's nothing more than a tool, but to help people work together more to achieve regional priorities, things that we as a community say are important to us. And it's got to be multilateral, it's got to be partnership and linking with the Treaty of Waitangi and the aspirations of the people of Waikato. So we chose the Sustainable Development Goal Network framework to use for this project. And the reason we chose this is that it's a global and internationally recognized language. It's a common language that we can all use together for action. And this is a little story that I would like to share with you. For me personally, see the change, this is how it came about. So I was thinking about my funding role. I was thinking about impact investment and working across sectors in collaboration. And I was thinking about how do we apply Sustainable Development Goals locally. And I happened to have a holiday and to have the opportunity to go to Nepal. And in Nepal, I was flying from Kathmandu to Pokhara, where we were going to start some walking. And when I got on the plane, I saw on my boarding card that there was, it said a portion of my ticket price had gone towards these 3 Sustainable Development Goals, which are to achieve the Sustainable Development Targets for Nepal. And I thought, that's fabulous. I'm very pleased that my money is going towards something useful like this. And when I sat in my seat and looked in the pocket in front of me, I saw that what the gentleman there is holding, a little flyer. And on there, they've got these SDGs for Nepal. And they're very specific. For example, reducing stunting in kids from around 36% in 2015 to 15% in 2030. Well, I thought, wow, that's not a goal we would have in the Waikato, because childhood stuntedness is not a big issue here, but we have other issues. We have other aspirations. If Nepal can do it, why can't we do it in the Waikato? So we came home and colleagues from across various sectors said, why don't we do this? Why don't we work out what it is that's important to our communities and just talk with people and find out what's going on. And we decided that this is Aotearoa New Zealand, so we can't just take the Sustainable Development Goals off the shelf without putting through the middle the PO, which is SDG 17, Partnerships for the Goals. We interpreted that for ourselves to mean to Ao Māori, partnership to achieve these goals. We also used a model here which was based on the Stockholm model. At the bottom we have the environment, because we know that a connected, vibrant community and a really prosperous economy are wholly owned subsidiaries of a healthy environment. So at the bottom, we've got the environmental goals, then the ones that are more community related, and then at the top, the economic development ones. There's a whole process that I'd love to share with you another time when I have more time about how we went about. There's a complicated map of how we went about finding these goals. But essentially, after over 12 months of consultation and talking at all levels. So we went into schools and we spoke to children in schools and young people and got them to draw pictures of what they wanted to achieve. We spoke in boardrooms. We put up stand-up signs and went into the middle of the city and allowed people to come and just talk to us about what they wanted to see and to give their feedback about what a sustainable Waikato means to them. And we came up with not 17, but 10 sustainable development goals for Waikato, which you can find on the Waikato Wellbeing Project website. And they are smart, but we've also interpreted them to say, what does that mean for us? So just to give you one example before I finish, one of the goals around quality education, decent work and economic growth, and reduced inequalities is to reduce the number of young people, 15 to 24, in Waikato who are not in employment, education or training from 12.6% in 2019 to less than 5% by 2030. Now, to achieve that, we have to work across sectors. But if we do achieve that, all of our young people will be engaged and productive. They'll be learning and earning a livelihood. Their mana will be enhanced and they will have a positive pathway to many life options. So we have a vision, but also something measurable. And we're now at this stage where the Waikato Wellbeing Project is getting catalysed into action. And we've got groups working across those 10 goals. So we're hopeful that we will achieve the vision of a more sustainable, prosperous and inclusive Waikato by 2030. Thank you.
Tēnā koe Raiwan, o tira e mihi kaua tēnei ki a koe, mō i whakawātea nei a koe i tēnei ngā pō, ki te kauhau ki a tātou. Man, awesome model there in terms of taking these SDGs aimed at a global audience and making it relevant to your local communities. I think it's a fantastic example of how linking in with what all of you guys have said tonight, speaking around making these partnerships, working together, working collaboratively and creating change. So tēnei te mihi kia koe Raiwan. So now we've got our panel session. So this is an opportunity rather to ask a few questions and things. Now we've had some pre-submitted questions tonight, and I've got a list of those here. But if you've got any questions whatsoever, please drop them into the chat. Chances are we won't get through all of them, but we'll do our best to find some time and space in the discussion tonight to look at your questions. So. Might give everyone just a bit of a 30-second kind of interlude, think of a question or two while we get our panelists ready. And so if they can, if you need to grab a drink of water or anything really quickly, do so. Otherwise, I'll ask you guys to, our panelists that is, to unmute yourselves in approximately 20 seconds, since I was talking too much. And check out this awesome visual representation of the discussion tonight. Tim Hammonds has been chipping away at this throughout the discussion tonight. Awesome mahi there. Loving the colour coordination too, it's great. Cool, so if we can get our panellists to unmute themselves. And I think, you know, in terms of starting the discussion off tonight with these questions, one of the questions I have in my mind is we've got these 17 goals, right? Some of them are more relevant to a New Zealand context, an Aotearoa New Zealand context compared to others. And I was just interested to ask our speakers tonight, what is the #1 priority in terms of these goals from your perspective? Is it around gender equality? Is it around poverty? Is it around our environment? And so in no particular order, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'm gonna kick us off with Pedram. What's your #1 priority in terms of the SDGs and what they seek to achieve, Pedram?
Kia ora, Corbin. There are different perspectives on this question. It's an important question, and you know, I think personally that my view, I think that it depends on where you are. Naturally, most important one is number 17, being partnership. That is a very important SDG, which brings us all together to work on this. But then if you are in Middle East, in different contexts, then SDG number 5, women can, you know, that's a critical SDG. Half of the population are not involved in development of the community. So yes, all in, but I think also the relevant, the other argument, which is they're all equally important, is a very solid argument.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you there. I think about you know, the issues that we have at my marae, Ngāi Tahu, even though you know, Tāmati's marae is literally 20 kilometres up and over the hill, a little bit longer if you've got to drive because of the hills, but the issues at Tāmati's marae might be completely different to mine. His marae's in a coastal setting, mine's inland a little bit, so there might be you know, different priorities for us in such a small localised region. And on that note, I'll pass over to Tāmati. He aha o whakaaro, cuz. What do you think is the #1 priority for you and your communities?
I think Pedram said it very well, that it depends on where you are globally to what one kind of affects you most. But where I come from and where I stand, I think kind of number 15, life on land, is quite a big one. It's huge. You know, usually what we're doing on land affects our life below the water. Our land can provide food for tangata whenua, for anyone that's on the land. It also provides food for, and there's nothing better. I guess there's nothing better than taking a deep breath and it kind of relaxes you, kind of brings you back to your tūronga waiwai, wherever that may be, and that there is nothing that affects your whole order, your mental state, and the kind of environment around you. And so having a healthy environment around you kind of gives you a healthy mindset as well. So I guess for myself, with how we all interact with our environment around us, I'd say life on land is quite a big one for us, I guess, in New Zealand. But there is also a few other, you know, it does depend on your respective environments around the world.
Definitely. And I think as well that idea of, you know, Indigenous peoples around the world have always had some element of having a symbiotic relationship with their environment. You know, you care for the environment will care for you. And it's something that globally, I think we haven't focused enough on. And it made me think of a whakatauki, actually, a Māori proverb. Whatu ngaro ngaro te tangata, toi tu te whenua. So humanity will wane eventually, it'll disappear, but the land will remain. So yeah, tēnei te mihi kia koe Tāmati. Raewyn, he aha o whakaaro, what do you think the priority for priority SDG is for you and your communities?
I think everyone will have their own individual priority, and I think that individual organisations will have priorities, and regions and communities will. But I think the really important point to remember is that the SDGs are interconnected. So if you achieve one, you'll achieve a lot of other things. And to give you a really quick example, in Raglan on the west coast here, there was 25 years ago, a man saw that he could no longer catch fish in the water. He said, this is no good. I want to do something about this. 20 years of collaborative work later, he's realized that it's actually riparian planting. And to do that, he got young people and trained them up with how to plant. And they started native nurseries. And so there was economic development, there was youth development, there was education, there was life on land. And ultimately, now Raglan is a jewel in the crown. It's sparkling and green, and clean. So I think you achieve one goal, you actually achieve a whole lot.
Older. And, that's kind of almost aligns with the idea of you give a man a fish, he can feed his whānau. You give him a fishing rod and teach him how to fish. There's an element of education in that in terms of the flow-on effects that can come from one simple act. Kia ora. Lucy, let's jump down to you. What's your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, I think as everyone has already touched on, the whole sustainable development goals ideas is that they all work together, but I personally think I kind of have two. The first one is climate action, because I think that most of the things that I've seen there, education, especially for women in undeveloped countries, that's definitely a massive factor to helping combat climate change. And a lot of other sustainable development goals are as well. But I also think number 17, partnerships, is very, very important, because Te Tiriti is obviously needs to be put front and foremost in our climate action journey in Aotearoa. And yeah, I think that I like the climate action goal, and I like all the goals, but I specifically like that one because I feel like it encompasses the other goals quite well as well. So, yeah.
And you guys have all touched on it tonight, this idea of partnership, working collaboratively. I mean, that's whakawhanaungatanga at its core, really. We've got a couple of speaker-specific questions here. The first one is for Raewyn. Do you have any suggestions or see a change coming on how companies might address funding of projects to align with this crossover? Most sustainability funding is separate from health/social funding.
Funding of projects. So I think I see a change in business actually coming through, and I see that coming through from young people. People now want to put their money where their values are. And so there's money to be made by both doing well and doing good. So I see a change. And every one of those sustainable development goals is actually a risk for a business. If we don't look after the climate, that's a risk for your insurance. If we don't have an educated workforce coming through, that's a risk for business. So I think the business has woken up to that, and they call it ESG, the environmental social governance aspects are really top of mind for boardrooms today. But I'm not sure if the questioner was referring particularly to business, or when they mentioned projects and funding, whether that was the NGO sector as well. And I think we can get focused on the project and lose sight of the why, the bigger picture. So it's important too.
Awesome. I've got another one here for Pedram. What is the best way to ask big questions of the government with big ideas to solve big problems? For example, businesses wanting to address SDG goals, e.g. number 14, overfishing, wonder what's already going on the space to either join the goal or introduce a new idea to help it. So what's the best way to ask big questions of the government with big ideas to solve big problems?
Question. I don't have an answer for that. Again, I think, that depends on which department, which country, and how we go about this. But I just want to say that, to a great extent, governments are aware of these issues at the same time, at least most progressive governments around the world. But change takes place very slowly. And government is a big wheel and cannot afford to make a mistake. So sometimes it might just take a bit longer for policies to be adopted and strategies to be put in place, but they have to be right because, as I said, governments cannot afford to make mistakes.
Yoda. And this question's popped up a couple of times, but and we've all again touched on it in some way, shape or form, whether it's around partnerships or understanding te taiao, our environment. But how can we incorporate or accelerate the integration of Te Ao Māori? So this is a question for all of our panelists, but everyone touched on it at some point, and I was quite shocked to hear from Pedram that we've got no sort of indicators of success or any framework around measuring things from a Te Ao Māori perspective. But yeah, particularly around well-being, and which is funny because we have all of these models from Tā Mason jury and things like that around individual well-being, but yeah, how can we integrate more mātauranga Māori, tikanga Māori, whakaaro Māori into our response to these issues in our changing climate? Open question. Anyone can chip in with a whakaaro review.
I think it might be the other way around. I think it's how do we achieve it with a Te Ao Māori view. So if you look at a Māori worldview, it's long-term, collective, environmentally focused and based. And if we make decisions in that way, we will achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and we will achieve impact, and we'll achieve vibrant businesses and communities. So it's kind of not how do we make it fit what we're trying to do, but how do we make what we're doing fit the existing, been there for hundreds of years way of doing things. I think we've got to look back to go forward.
Kia ora. Me te tiro whakamuri ki te anga whakamua. Kia ora. What about one of our rangatahi? Lucy, Tāmati, how o kōrua whakaaro? What do you guys think?
I'll kind of have something briefly to speak on it. It's about, we live in a world together, we're now coexisting with so many different cultures. For those that live within New Zealand, everyone has the right to speak, to understand, to learn, and to whakaaro Māori. And so it's a way to educate everybody, I guess, properly in their own respected environments, and how to let them engage their own tūranga waiwai in Te Ao Māori, and allow them to kind of run with this idea that, you know, I guess they've kind of come up with, and along it might, because usually, like I say, our views are quite environmentally based, Rowan, quite right. And it's about how, if we were to give them a couple of tools or a few ideas and educate them in a way through whakaaro Māori, then they'll kind of, that idea of growth of Te Reo Māori and Te Ao Māori within our, I guess, our nation will kind of work together, will kind of flow, or kind of work along together. So that's, yeah, something like that's my 2 cents worth.
Kia ora. Lucy, I think this is could be a good point to bring you in. You mentioned at one point in your talk this idea of climate justice, and the fact that many of the world's populations and communities are going to suffer the most from climate change and things that have been forced upon them in different ways. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on, you know, how can we get some sort of equity, or how can we approach this climate justice in terms of these discussions around the SDGs?
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's about, firstly, educating everybody, because there is, every part of our world is at a very different stage in their journey with the SDGs, whether they have a plan implemented or not, but naturally they will be somewhere in the journey. But I think it's about firstly educating and making sure, and we can start with Aotearoa as well, and educating people about what's going on and what they can do. I think it's, when we talk about a just transition, it's also a lot about, like, bringing it back to Aotearoa. People who are currently in jobs, say in the farming industry or in the coal mining industry, or people in those jobs, we need to work together to achieve climate justice. So the whole idea of climate justice is kind of, to give an example, moving people out of jobs that are polluting the environment, and helping them be passionate and foster a passion for new jobs with the same skill set and the same sort of ideas required, because you kind of can't leave any generation behind. And even if it does seem like some generations just don't understand or don't want to take action, as current, everyone is alive in the world that we have, and while they are alive and here, they need to be part of the solution. They need to be part of our transition. So I think it's about bringing everyone along, and yeah.
Cool. Really interesting question here, which I think is linked into some of the things Pedram was talking around in terms of indicators, is measuring our impact that we're having. But again, open to anyone on the panel, but how do we start to measure impact consistently across such different sectors, SDGs? I think that's quite an interesting one. How we measure poverty, for example, might be completely different to how we measure life on the land or life under the oceans, or in turn, the partnerships we create. So any thoughts or whakaaro around how we measure such distinct and diverse SDGs?
I'll give you a starter. I think that having a specific thing you're measuring is good, but if you're looking for tools, there are some out there globally that are starting to gain global traction. There's one in particular that's called the Impact Management Project, which is IMP. It's recommended by the Global Impact Investment Network and the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, and it's 5 measures which you can apply to any project or process that you're doing around who's impacted, what's the depth of impact, and the who can be the environment, what's impacted, who's impacted, what's the depth of impact, how quick is the impact, what's the risk of unintentional consequences, and what's your contribution to that impact, that project, what's its contribution. And there are 5 measures with a scale, so it's quite instinctive. I think sometimes we overthink measurement and it becomes too difficult. It's about choosing some specific data points and then measuring some specific things. And if we can use a common language, like the Sustainable Development Goals, like the Impact Management Project, we can start, as you do with financial accounting, we can start comparing projects and initiatives and managing them for outcomes.
Kia ora. Pedram, I see you've unmuted yourself there.
No, I was going to, but I think Raywin answered it. Thank you, Raywin. That was great.
Kia ora. We've got time for one more question really quickly. I've lost my screen, sorry. The rate we're going, we might not have time for a question. There we go. For all panelists, the theme of the event is See the Change. Can the panel share examples or things they have seen that gives them hope for the future?
Can I speak on that one briefly? One thing that gives me hope is, well, right now we have 118 people watching this or a part of this Zoom now, and that's kind of given me a little bit of hope, knowing that there's quite a connected group nationally that are all interested in the same kind of topic and globally, and I wanted to make an impact. So that there's given me a little bit of a inspiration, I guess. And so, yeah, that's my little bit.
Older. I think that idea of, you know, even though it might only be 100 of us, by the time we go out and spread the word with our peers and talk about how much of an awesome forum this is, you know, we can quadruple these numbers for the next hui, perhaps. Okay, so now I think we're about to run out of time for any more questions, but we've come to quite a cool part of tonight's proceedings in terms of Lucy, one of our panelists, has written a waiata or two for us, a song or two that she's going to perform for us tonight. And so she's got roughly around about 10 minutes. It doesn't have to fill up the whole time before we break out into our working groups. But I'll hand it over to Lucy because I think she's got a bit of an introduction and in terms of explaining some of the waiata that she's going to be sharing with us tonight. So tēnei te mihi kia koe, Lucy.
Awesome, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I probably won't fill 10 minutes, as Erica said to me there. We might have gone a little bit over time in some places, which is all good because it'll be shorter than that. But so for my first song, this is one that I wrote in lockdown about kind of the speed that the climate crisis is coming on. And I think for me as well, it seems like a really surreal situation to be in and not relatable in any format because it's so hard to know what is going to happen. And like when I think about the future, it's kind of very blurry because we just have no idea what's going to happen. So yeah, the song is about how surreal it feels, but how much of a reality it actually is. And the song is called Wake Me Up. I see them burn, people burn, town is empty. I see the sky, see the smoke, see the envy. I hear them scream, people scream, and they're screaming my name. Help me, they seem to say, but safe ain't a place anymore. You have stolen what we need, and you have taken all our lives. Wake me up, paradise of paradise. Help me, I can't breathe. I'm trapped in a daydream. Wake me up, paradise of paradise. The village gone, the people burn. Help me, I can't see. I'm trapped in this matrix. Nothing is left, something kept isn't worthy. You let us burn cause you can't eat your money. Children will play, took their hearts, now they're crying alone. Take me home, they say, but home ain't a place anymore. You have stolen the key and you have burned down the doors. Now do you realize what you've done? Wake me up, paradise on paradise. Help me, I can't breathe. I'm trapped in a daydream. Wake me up, paradise on paradise. The village gone, the people burn. Help me, I can't see. I'm trapped in this matrix. So yeah, thank you guys for listening. The next song is if you are in Christchurch and if you went to the strikes, you'll recognise the song. It's a song that I wrote much before the strikes started, but it's become quite an anthem for the movement, and I've played the song, I think, at every strike in person we've had so far. So this is Rise Up. Rise up, share your voices, stand up, make your choices. This moment defines us. This moment defines us. Rise up, raise your voices, stand up, live your choices. This moment defines us. This moment aligns us. Rise up, join your voices, stand up, love your choices. This moment defines us. Our planet requires us. Rise up, raise your voices, stand up, live your choices. This moment defines us. This moment aligns us. Rise up, join your voices, stand up, love the choices. This moment defines us. Our planet requires us. Thank you guys. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that and have a great rest of your evening.
Kia ora, Lucy. Geez, man, a lot of talent, eh? Not only are these guys going to be the rangatira, the leaders of tomorrow, they're also going to be our entertainers of tomorrow too. So, tēnei te mihi kia koe, Lucy. So now we're going to split off into our breakout room sessions, and so the workshop streams. And so these are running parallel, and so you've got two options. The first is to stay in this particular Zoom chat, where we're going to be looking at the power of visual storytelling with James Bishop and our guest facilitator, Tim Hammonds, who's been doodling for us throughout the hui tonight. And so if you're interested in staying in that or being involved in that particular session, again, it's around the power of visual storytelling. Please stay in this chat, okay? The second stream tonight that we're running is looking at the SDGs in a bit of a 101 kind of session. And so this is with Dr. Alan Hill. And again, if you are interested in this session, SDGs 101, you have to jump out of this Zoom link and click on the one in the program, which is also being posted in the chat at the moment. So I've got the number here, Zoom number. And so if you are interested in the workshop on SDGs 101 with Dr. Alan Hill, the Zoom number is 987-557-1576. And you also have to put in a passcode to enter that, which is 984921. So again, the Zoom number, 987-557-15761, and the passcode is 984921. And both of these, both the Zoom number and the passcode are in the program. And so again, the two sessions that we're running in parallel tonight. First one, Power of Visual Storytelling with James Bishop and guest facilitator Tim Hammonds in this chat room. The second one is SDGs 101 with Dr. Alan Hill, and that's the Zoom link that you need to jump into, okay? And just a reminder as well, we've got about 40-ish, 42-ish minutes, at which point at 8:20 p.m. we're going to jump back in to this main Zoom chat, the one where the Power of Visual Storytelling is happening, where we're going to do a bit of a wrap up, some reflections, as well as a few thank yous and things. So we're due to start the two parallel sessions at 7:40. So you've got about a minute and a half if you need to go to the wharepaku, tēnā, haere, if you need to go to the toilet. Now you've got a quick minute or so, or if you need to grab a drink or anything like that. Otherwise, we'll see you in the two workshop streams in approximately 1 minute. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.